The ancient Greeks were a naturally curious people. The belief systems they constructed were motivated by a need to discover some sense of meaning and order in the natural world and in the world of human society. As in Western society in our day, some pursued these ends through faith or creative expression, others through rational inquiry. It was the achievements of the Greeks that laid the foundations on which much of the West's later intellectual accomplishments are built. Greek culture was not entirely original, of course. As with all ancient civilizations, we can trace a web of influences that led to the emergence of a rich culture that is both unique to each civilization, yet also somewhat syncretic. As Greek merchants and colonists became increasingly prominent in the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions in the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, they became aware of the sophisticated cultural achievements of more ancient civilizations, including those of Mesopotamia and Egypt. It was inevitable that Greek intellectuals would borrow ideas about science and mathematics from the Babylonians, for example, or ideas about engineering, geometry, anatomy, and medicine from the Egyptians. And remember that in the 7th century, the Greeks also adopted the Phoenician alphabet to write down their own language, adding vowels to Phoenician consonants to create a richly expressive and flexible writing system for rendering the nuances of spoken language. The Greeks also started using the Egyptian invention of papyrus to record their poems and epics, which were kept as scrolls. From around 500 BCE, these scrolls were preserved in libraries, allowing for the storage and dissemination of knowledge in a way that intensified the human capacity for collective learning. Despite all these obvious influences, the Greeks also added their own genius to this syncretic mix and constructed one of the richest and most influential cultures in history. This is nowhere more obvious than in the realm of philosophy, a field in which the towering figures of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle used reason and logic to construct sophisticated explanations of the natural and moral world and the place of humans in it. But despite the monumental achievements of Greek thinkers, most Greeks did not have an advanced education nor a sophisticated ability to rigorously apply logic to questions of meaning and purpose. Rather, most Greeks relied on religion to help them understand the world and their place in it. And given the often spiteful and willful behavior of the many gods and goddesses who dwelt on the lofty slopes of Mount Olympus, what a confusing and arbitrary world this must have seemed to them. Greek religion was the epitome of polytheism, a pantheon of deities that represented all the phenomena of the world and whose relationships explain why and how the world became what it is. The Greeks constructed epic myths to explain this world, beginning with the creation of Mother Earth out of a formless void of chaos, as revealed to the poet Hesiod. According to Hesiod, Earth generated a partner in the sky, and together they gave birth to day and night, to sun and moon, and to all the other natural phenomena. In his Theogony, Hesiod wrote, "Truly, at first chaos existed, and next wide-bosomed earth, the ever-sure foundations of all the deathless ones who hold the peaks of snowy Olympus, and dim Tartarus in the depths of the wide-pathed earth, and Eros, love, fairest among the deathless gods, who unnerves the limbs and overcomes the mind and wise counsels of all gods and all men within them. From chaos came forth Erebus and black night, but of night were born the air and the day, whom she conceived and bore from union in love with Erebus. And earth first bore starry heaven, equal to herself, to cover her on every side and to be an ever-sure abiding place for the blessed gods." From the beginning, the Greek pantheon was a place of struggle between these various spirits, and out of early conflicts, the god Zeus, grandson of earth and sky, emerged as the most powerful ruler of the divine realm. Zeus tried to remain above the fray, although he could be a tempestuous hurler of thunderbolts when enraged, which he often was because of the regular plots against him by his wife Hera, which were typically motivated by Zeus's incessant philandering. Zeus's and Hera's court was populated by all manner of gods and goddesses, each with their own special powers and responsibilities. Zeus's son Apollo promoted wisdom and justice and urged the people to live a life of moderation. But the goddess of fortune, Tyche, would constantly test these qualities by bringing unexpected opportunities or difficulties. And all the while, the terrifying Furies were waiting to exact vengeance upon any Greek who violated divine law. According to Orphic legend, Dionysus, another product of one of Zeus's affairs, was killed and eaten by the evil Titans at angry Hera's behest. But the goddess Athena rescued Dionysus's heart, and Zeus resurrected him through Semele, a mortal woman. Zeus then took revenge on the Titans by zapping them with thunderbolts. Then there was Orpheus himself, a shadowy deity from the underworld, who imparted to humans the news that Zeus had created them from Titan's ashes. But human nature was actually composed of two opposing elements: the evil body made of the ash of the Titans, and the divine soul of Dionysus that had been absorbed by the body when the Titans devoured him. Only with death would our divine souls be freed from our evil bodies. All these fascinating stories can be understood as metaphors to explain the world and the powerful forces within it. But they also served a civic function in that they allowed for the formation of religious cults that provided an outlet for various groups within Greek society. The cults established rituals that were known only to initiates. The rites of even the most famous cult, the cult of the Eleuthian mysteries, are still largely unknown, although they apparently included a purification process, a ritual bath in the sea, and 3 days of fasting. Of particular importance to gender relations in Greece were the cults that were open to women, which allowed them to find a place in wider society beyond the confines of the home. The fertility cult of the goddess of grain, Demeter, was a women-only cult. Each autumn before the planting of the annual grain crop, women would leave the city and gather on a hillside for several days, offering sacrifices to the goddess and participating in a feast in the hope that this would ensure bountiful harvests. Women, as well as other marginalized groups in Greek society, like slaves and resident aliens, were also prominent in the cult of Dionysus, an ecstatic, liberating cult fueled by the consumption of wine, the intoxicating effects of which were said to represent possession by the divine Dionysian spirit itself. When the vines produced their fruit in the spring, the devotees marched off into the hills to musical accompaniment, chanting as they walked or danced, depending on how much wine had been consumed. The Athenian playwright Euripides gives us a glimpse into these celebrations in his play The Bacchae. With Dionysus disguised as a human, Euripides describes a joyful procession into the mountains where the ecstatic music and dancing, consumption of the first wine harvest of the season, and Dionysus's meddling brings the women to such a state of frenzy that they fall upon a herd of cattle and rip them to shreds with their bare hands. Later, Dionysus points out to the frenzied women a peeping Tom in a tree observing the spectacle. This so enrages the women that they force him out of the tree and rip off his head and limbs, then tear the rest of his body to pieces. Whether Euripides' account is accurate or exaggerated for dramatic effect, the wild nature of the cult of Dionysus persisted until the 5th century BCE, when civic authorities ultimately decided to take tighter control of communal rituals and remove some of their more frenetic elements. Eventually, the rituals associated with the cults moved from the mountains to the city centre. And in Athens, the cult of Dionysus evolved into the city Dionysia, where rather than dancing into the hills, audiences viewed plays that examined human morality and our relationship with the gods. The drama that emerged was innovative, provocative, and profoundly influential. These plays were presented in magnificent semicircular open-air theatres that seated up to 20,000 spectators. These theatres are still renowned for their superb acoustics, and research has suggested that one explanation for this is that the limestone worked as a filter to suppress the low frequencies of voices, essentially minimizing noise from the huge crowds. At the same time, the semicircular rows of limestone seats also reflected higher frequencies from the actors and musicians back towards the audience. The Greeks may have stumbled upon these acoustic properties of this sedimentary rock by accident without really understanding how they had constructed an environment that led to the exceptional audibility of sound projection. The dramas performed in these theatres, which were usually presented as part of a Competition played out in full view of the audience on a small performance space called the orchestra. That term didn't come to refer to a group of performing musicians until the 18th century, by the way. There were no curtains in the Greek orchestra, nor any set changes. The scenery was as stark and revealing as the plays themselves. The playwright Aeschylus, a veteran of the Persian Wars, is credited as the first great innovator of Greek drama, adding more actors, more elaborate costumes, and genuine dramatic monologues to his plays. Yet many of these dramas, such as Agamemnon and Prometheus Bound, were deeply conservative and promoted the values of Greek religion. They conclude by arguing that genuine wisdom is only attainable if one submits to the guidance of the gods. Another brilliant Athenian dramatic innovator was the highly educated actor and musician Sophocles, who wrote more complex psychological roles for his protagonists. In his first drama competition at the age of 27, he defeated Aeschylus, and in plays like Antigone, Oedipus Rex, and Electra, he set his characters on endless quests for self-knowledge, depicting humans as great in their noble response to anything that fate could throw at them. A lifelong friend of Sophocles was another brilliant dramatist, Euripides, who wrote experimental, even scandalous plays that led to him being accused of using immorality to subvert the state. He was particularly damning of politicians who sent their communities into war. And in The Trojan Women, he paints a bleak picture of a world in which human life is pathetic and the gods ridiculous. The different opinions expressed by these dramatists on the role of the gods in the life of humans reflected a broader dichotomy between those Greeks who sought an understanding of the world through religion and those who sought it through reason. The rich schools of Greek philosophy that emerged set out to explain not only the purpose for human existence, but indeed the very nature of the physical world and the structure of the universe itself, using rational, logical arguments that had no need to resort to polytheistic beliefs. It was the pursuit of knowledge of the natural world by early Greek thinkers, an approach we would describe as scientific today, that paved the way for the later moral and ethical philosophy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The birthplace of Greek philosophy, a word that means lovers of wisdom, was not Greece itself, but the colonies established by the mainland city-states along the Ionian coast of modern Turkey and in Sicily and southern Italy. One of the first Ionian thinkers was Thales of Miletus, who flourished around 600 BCE. Thales was an extraordinary mixture of philosopher and pragmatic scientist, and as far as we are aware, he was the first Western intellectual to argue that the universe could be completely understood by natural laws and reason, not by mythology and religion. Consider the impact that this breathtaking notion has had on the course of human discovery since, and the extraordinary confluence of social stability, education, culture, and individual insight that was necessary for Thales to conceive of it in the first place. Using his mathematical and astronomical skills to accurately predict solar eclipses, Thales argued that the universe was composed of 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. And correctly predicting the theory held by biologists in the 21st century, he believed that the first life forms must have appeared in water. Anaximander, a student of Thales, attempted to accurately describe the true shape of the earth in relation to the other celestial objects. His argument that the circle of the sun is 27 times the size of the earth is the beginning of attempts to accurately measure the size of the cosmos and the entities within it. The Pythagoreans, a semi-religious society founded by Pythagoras in a Greek colony in Sicily, adopted an approach to knowledge that combined mathematics and metaphysics into the first known system that used numbers to understand the nature of the universe. For example, it was the Pythagoreans who discovered that the square of the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the other 2 sides. Another very influential discovery of the Pythagoreans was that musical harmony was based on mathematical proportions. Take a string and pluck it, and consider the note that you hear, the first note in the scale, the tonic we might call it today. If you divide that string precisely in half and pluck it again, it produces a tone that is exactly 1 octave above the tonic. If you make the string 2/3 the original length, you get a perfect fifth above the tonic. 3/4 the original length, a perfect fourth is the result. The whole history of Western musicology that followed this discovery essentially explored such harmonic relationships through to the microtones that dominated much of the dissonant serious music of the late 20th century. The Pythagoreans essentially discovered the entire knowledge basis of Western harmony. Based on this discovery, Pythagoras is said to have hypothesized that the entire universe and the motion of its stars and planets are governed by mathematical equations. Consider what a remarkable insight that was, given the leap of logic it required. The philosopher Democritus, who was born in northern mainland Greece around 460 BCE, was part of a group of materialist philosophers who approached the world from a pragmatic perspective. They were not so much interested in the purpose of events, but in explaining the events themselves. What was the cause of this or that physical phenomenon, and what earlier circumstances led to this process? As extraordinary as this sounds, Democritus and his colleagues accurately suggested that everything in the universe consisted of atoms, physically indivisible units with properties such as weight, size, and shape that help determine what shapes or objects will form when these tiny atomic particles come together. Atoms move downwards through the void, Democritus argued, colliding and becoming entangled with each other, forming groups of atoms that in turn make up the four elements of the universe that Thales had described: fire, air, earth, and water. The extraordinary variety of objects that make up our world derive from the somewhat erratic collision between infinite numbers of atoms moving in the void. Is there any other ancient account that comes as close to our modern understanding of the universe as that proposed by Democritus and the atomists nearly 2,500 years ago? Attempts to understand the world from a scientific point of view are also evident in the work of Greek physicians like Hippocrates, who in his treatise on the sacred disease emphatically rejected the notion that epilepsy was divine in origin. Epilepsy was an illness of the brain, which meant that the seizures suffered by epileptics had a natural cause. The great text that Hippocrates produced, the Hippocratic Corpus, is another milestone in the history of rational science in that it attempts to expand the knowledge of diseases and treatments by observing the course of illnesses and describing rational medical interventions. The final group of pre-Socratic philosophers we need to consider are the sophists, intellectuals who are more interested in human behavior than in the natural world. The sophists might be seen as the predecessors of the liberal humanists that would appear 2,000 years later during the Renaissance. They were itinerant professors who carried out their solemn mission to educate the young through small group tutorials and public lectures. Like the position many modern professors find themselves in contemporary society, their skepticism of the accepted ideas and standard mores of human behavior often made them figures of suspicion, potential corruptors of the young, dangerous intellectuals who were attempting to undermine the state. Sophists were master lecturers, renowned for their skills at rhetoric, the art of using language and emotion to persuade the listener. Some of the statements of individual sophists still resonate with us today. Protagoras stated that man is the measure of all things, and Prodicus of Chios, who came to Athens as an ambassador for his polis, argued that all religion originated in the worship of natural entities associated with agriculture, such as the sun, rivers, fertility. Primitive humans, he said, had been in such awe of these natural phenomena that they ascribed divine attributes to them. Hippias of Elytz, contemporary of Protagoras and Prodicus, is credited with advancing the concept of natural law, the idea that there are rules of moral behavior that can be deduced by reason. Gorgias, a native of the Greek colony of Leontini in Sicily, challenged the capacity of the human mind by arguing that nothing actually exists in the universe. And even if something does exist, nothing can be known about it. And even if something could be known about it, the knowledge of this thing could not be communicated to others. Both Plato and Aristotle later had something to say about Gorgias. Plato criticized him by noting the basic substance and reality of which all things are composed. and Aristotle accused him of simply trying to make money by appearing wise and clever, thus deceiving the public by means of misleading arguments. The predecessor of both Plato and Aristotle is one of the most famous philosophers who ever lived, Socrates. Like his pupil Plato and Plato's pupil Aristotle, Socrates disagreed with the sophists. Only, he suggested, by asking meaningful questions and subjecting the answers to logical analysis, that is, not by using mere rhetoric and sophistic tricks, could agreement be reached about ethical and moral behavior. So Socrates questioned everybody, friends and strangers alike, about everything. He described himself as the midwife assisting in the birth of correct ideas. Behind this constant interrogation was his principle that the unexamined life is not worth living. The only evil for Socrates was ignorance. Human virtue and excellence were the products of constant intellectual activity in the pursuit of genuine knowledge. Socrates took this idea into the realm of ethics, arguing that the wise man who knows what is right will also do what is right, that intellectual cultivation will inevitably lead to ethical cultivation, surely the aim of all educators ever since. But like the sophists, Socrates' constant questioning of everything, including the political leaders of Athens, raised the suspicions of the state. Socrates was arrested as a subversive radical, tried by his peers, and condemned to death. He accepted his fate without bitterness, drinking poison as required by Athenian law, when he probably could have chosen to exile himself from Athens instead. The death sentence against Socrates revealed that even the Athenians had a limited tolerance towards efforts at understanding nature and explaining it rationally without recourse to the gods. But thinking of this kind could not be suppressed, as Plato and Aristotle demonstrated. Plato, who lived a long life between 427 and 347, was Socrates' most famous disciple. He established a school of higher education in the Athenian suburb of Academia, the name that has since been applied to the world of professors and intellectuals ever since. Plato stated his theory on the nature of the universe and the creation of the world in Timaeus. The cosmos, he hypothesized, is shaped like a globe, and the objects within it are made of the four elements of fire, earth, water, and air. The stars follow a circular orbit around the center, and the planets also move along a circular track. The moon and the sun revolve around the earth, with the moon being closer to the earth than the sun. Plato's calculation of time was based on the movement of the heavenly bodies, the month on the orbit of the moon, the year on that of the sun. The earth, which he believed was a sphere spinning on its axis, created day and night with its rotation. Plato also produced some of the most famous works in the history of philosophy, using Socrates as his main character and pursuing philosophical questions through his depictions of dialogues between Socrates and others. One of his most influential works, The Republic, begins as a Socratic dialogue about the nature of justice, but proceeds to an extended discussion of the virtues of justice, wisdom, courage, and moderation as they appear in individual human beings and in society as a whole. One of my favorite works of Plato, as it has been for untold generations of educators, is the part of The Republic called The Allegory of the Cave. This evolves from a discussion on the goals of education to a plan for an ideal society and the kind of educational program which will be needed to achieve it. Through the allegory, Plato conveyed his belief that absolute truth existed in the realm of thought, a semi-spiritual world of forms and ideas beyond the material world. The beauty and ethical good that we perceive in the real world are only imperfect reflections of the eternal forms that exist in this spiritual world, like shadows on the wall of a cave rather than the actual objects themselves. The purpose of existence was to discover through reason these eternal ideas and absolute truths that dwelt in the world of forms. The allegory is a powerful meditation on the possibilities of achieving human potential and of the role of effective education in helping liberate humans from the world of darkness and shadow embodied by the cave. Another classic work of Plato's is The Symposium, a profound meditation on human emotion in general and on love in particular. In it, Socrates says that love is a search for that which we lack. It is not the actual physical appearance of objects in the world that we should seek to love, but rather the eternal and unchanging world of ideas. True love proceeds through a series of steps, each one demanding a higher level of reflection than the first. From love of appearance, so love of physical beauty, to love of a belief or of the unseen beauty in the soul, to love of thought and beautiful ideas, and finally to love of knowledge itself, which is the real beauty in the universe. Once perceived, this knowledge will become the true basis of ethical conduct for humans. Essentially, this highest form of knowledge is a deep understanding of eternal values which are not subject to the winds of social and moral change. Plato's greatest pupil, Aristotle, also went on to found his own institute of higher learning in Athens, the Lyceum. And Aristotle also profoundly impacted history as a teacher, in particular through his role as tutor to Alexander of Macedon, about whom more later. Aristotle disagreed with Plato on the nature of truth and the Platonic idea of the world of forms. Ideas, said Aristotle, did not exist apart from the material world. Knowledge was rather a collection and organization of facts about reality, and his Lyceum became a great center for the collection and analysis of data from many branches of learning. In fact, Aristotle's intellectual interests were incredibly varied. He essentially invented the modern academic disciplines of biology, mathematics, astronomy, physics, literature, rhetoric, logic, politics, ethics, and metaphysics. In its essence, Aristotelian philosophy rejects any sort of divine intervention, asserting that logic is the key to knowledge and that universal truths are only attainable from sound principles worked out in a systematic, logical fashion based on accurate observations of the natural world. So Aristotle and his students dedicated themselves to studies of the origin, development, physiology, and motion of all animals, for example. Yet he was also profoundly interested in the psychology of the human animal and in the function of sense, of memory, dreams, youth and old age, life and death. Above all, Aristotle, like Confucius on the other side of Eurasia, was intensely interested in ethics, in the creation of men with virtue, intelligence, and good character. In his work, The Ethics, Aristotle argued that humans reveal what they are through what they do, not what they say. So human character must be judged through a study of actions and deeds, not words. Aristotle's Poetics, which was really the first attempt in Western civilization to analyze the meaning of beauty as reflected in various mediums of art, tries to separate aesthetic from ethical principles. For Aristotle, beauty must be judged in relation to nature. Famously, and much like his master Plato, he argued that art brings to completion that which nature is unable to finish. One of the most remarkable things about the achievements of these Greek thinkers is that they made their arguments about the power of human reason to decipher the truth and purpose of existence in the midst of a profoundly religious age. Most of their fellow citizens, like the poet Hesiod in his Theogony, sought a meaning to human existence through an understanding of the relationship of humans with the gods on Mount Olympus. This profound dichotomy between understanding the universe as an entity created by a god or gods, and therefore knowable only through submission to gods, or of the ability of humans to understand everything through reason and rational logic, has remained the defining eternal question faced by human beings ever since. Arrian, the ancient biographer of Alexander of Macedon, includes in his work a letter that Alexander purportedly wrote to Darius, king of the Persians, whom Alexander had just defeated in battle. Your ancestors invaded Macedonia and the rest of Greece and did us harm, although we had not done you any previous injury. I have been appointed commander-in-chief of the Greeks, and it is with the aim of punishing the Persians that I have crossed into Asia, since you are the aggressors. My father died at the hands of conspirators instigated by you, as you yourself boasted to everybody in your letters. You sent unfriendly letters to the Greeks about me to push them to war against me. Your envoys corrupted my friends and sought to destroy the peace which I established among the Greeks. I therefore led an expedition against you, and now I have defeated in battle first your generals, and now you in person and your army, and by the grace of the gods, I control the country. In future, whenever you communicate with me, address me as King of Asia. Do not write to me as an equal, but state your demands to the master of all your possessions. If you wish to lay claim to the title of king, then stand your ground and fight for it. Do not take to flight, as I shall pursue you wherever you may be. Alexander refers here to Persian complicity in the murder of his father, Philip II, who with the assistance of his son Alexander had defeated Greek armies at the Battle of Chaeronea in August 338 BCE, which gave the Macedonians control over much of Greece. But this victory was intended to be just the prelude to Philip's real aim of leading a combined Macedonian and Greek army against the Persians. Philip's assassination meant that the task would be taken up by Alexander, who set out in 336 BCE on one of the most audacious campaigns in history. Alexander's campaign marked the beginning of a fresh chapter in the history of civilization. It ushered in a new era during which Greek civilization expanded across vast regions of Afro-Eurasia. Alexander's letter also suggests that since the end of the Peloponnesian War, the Persians had continued to meddle in Greek affairs, pursuing policies that aimed to keep Greece fragmented. Many Greeks lost faith in democracy, and some openly called for the appearance of a benevolent tyrant who would reunite the polis, although few would have expected this champion to come from Macedonia. Until the mid-4th century, Macedonia had been seen as little more than a rugged frontier state to the north of Greece, home to peasant farmers